Hi, my name is Dennis Luttrell, and I'm the city manager for Lebanon, New Hampshire. Here today with another installment of Lebanon in Depth. I'm here today joined by David Brooks, the Director of Planning and Zoning for the city, and with us also is Jeffrey Morrison Logan, and his titles, I have to read this because it's rather lengthy, New England Regional Director of Planning, Urban Design, and Landscape Architecture with the firm of VHB. If you recall from our last session, we're here to introduce you to the Downtown Visioning Project that was being conducted by the city. And today we want to talk a little bit about all the progress that's been made to date and where do we go from here. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to David and Jeffrey.
So as you mentioned, we're working on the Downtown Visioning Study. The genesis of this project goes back about a year and a half now when we discovered that a tunnel through the downtown area from a former rail line was having some structural issues that needed to be closed off. The city council and the former city manager put together a program to study this, not only the tunnel but the broader downtown. We wanted to really take a step back and see if we wanted to keep the tunnel if we had the option. So since that time, and as you mentioned, when we met prior, that was the day of the first public meeting back in October. Had a great turnout for that meeting. More than 75 people showed up for that meeting. Had an excellent presentation and response feedback from the group, which began what has really become a pretty robust engagement and outreach effort on our part. We're trying to do everything we can to get the communities, not just let them know what's happening, but to give them a forum to participate and get involved in what the outcomes are going to be and what they ought to be. So very quickly, since the night of that first public meeting, we initiated a public survey, which is available on the website. It was also featured in a recent newsletter that went out to every resident in the city. We've had we're approaching 500 responses to that survey, both electronically and in paper copy now, which is terrific. The survey is going to run for a few more weeks.
Is there a deadline that people have to respond online by?
We haven't set a firm deadline, but at some point the consultants need to have the information. They need to have the people's responses, their feedback, their ideas, in order to begin to build that into the alternatives.
So would you encourage people to get it in rather than sooner?
I would absolutely encourage them to get it in the next week or so. That would be by, say, the end of January. We'll be having a second public meeting on February 4th. That's part of what we want to talk about today. So prior to that February 4th second public meeting, we need to hear from people. We want to hear from people. In addition to the online survey, we've put together some what I call I Wish Downtown Lebanon posters. Those have been put up in City Hall and a couple of other locations in the downtown area. They've been pretty successful at getting people to just think about and write right onto the poster what they think, what their ideas are for downtown. What do they wish downtown had? What do they wish downtown was or could be? So we've gotten well over 250 discrete responses on those posters, and lots of dittos and me toos and seconds. So we've got some good information about what kinds of things people would like, whether it be a coffee shop, bookstore, whether it be more police presence or less police presence, less signage, a safe place for kids to play, benches, street trees, all kinds of things. So we hope to, again, as we get the feedback, I've been delivering it to the consultants so that they can begin to weave that into the various alternatives and incorporate that into the planning efforts that they're doing. So that's basically where we are at this point. Again, we're always open to more feedback, more ideas, more comments, but the process is moving forward with starting to put together and to present some of the alternatives that have come out of all of those 750 plus comments that we've received And so that's where Jeffrey and his team have begun to put things on paper and sketch things up as to what it all might mean.
Right.
Great. Jeffrey?
So yeah, I can kind of fill in what we've been actively working on for the last couple months, and reflecting back on that October 1st public meeting. They're great meetings to come to learn really about so much about the Lebanon community, the downtown, the residents, the business owners, and so forth. If you recall, we had a series of breakout sessions during that evening.
Right.
We had exercises as people came in that evening to talk about, one word that best describes the issues, one word that best describes the opportunities. We had our consultant team there, as David mentioned, around economic development issues, urban design issues, natural, cultural resources in the riverfront, as well as on transportation-related issues. And we heard a lot that evening.
Right.
With the 75 participants and with all the great facilitation from the city's different staff and so forth. I thought it was really successful. What we were able to do after that was spend really quality time with the city staff and with our team, reflecting upon what we heard and kind of packaging kind of that summary so we could figure out, well, how do we structure 2 or 3 different alternatives about envisioning what the downtown could be like over time. So we heard through that process common themes around traffic and parking was a major issue, about this idea that the downtown was great but somewhat disconnected in its parts and not leveraging the waterfront, for example. And on the opportunistic side, we heard a lot about the wish list items about restaurants, coffee shops, businesses and mixed-use activities, and taking the downtown to that next level and building upon the arts and culture that's already there as well. So our homework was definitely cut out for us in structuring these alternatives. At the same time, probably in November or so, we were also looking at other analysis part of our findings. So understanding the traffic impact. So we did some traffic counts, for example. We've built some models to analyze what you have out and how the downtown operates, which was very helpful. And at the same time, we rounded out our economic development analysis. So part of our team members understand in economics in terms of retail, office, commercial, residential potential that's out there. And I think the good news that we're finding on that front is there's tons of potential within the region, and if that can be captured in the downtown, there's a lot of great things that could happen on that side of it. And from our traffic modeling, we also found out over the last few months is that there's some capacity that's still within this system. There's things that we can do to make it operate better. So we're really excited about showing the community different ways of envisioning how those different systems can come together and how the downtown can build upon the framework that's there and the structure that's there to really set the stage for the next round of investments and so forth. So we're very excited about that part as well. So we've been sharing some preliminary ideas with the city staff and getting ready for next month. And in general have probably 2 or 3 different alternatives that capture these ideas. And what we've also come to find is that the downtown has different opportunities in different segments of the downtown. So we want to talk about how maybe Hanover Street is very different than the riverfront.
So there's discrete subsets to those 3 alternatives that you developed.
That's right. So maybe the core of downtown, where the mall is, might have different opportunities than as you come off of the highway and Route 120. And I think that we'll talk about where they're different and why, how that can maybe have different systems maybe operate better or differently, but also tie that into what do you want the downtown to be. So we've been focusing on illustrations and diagrams and so forth, and we're going to be excited to show some character sketches that they're kind of very loose sketches of visioning about things that don't exist in the downtown, and we've got several of those to show to people so they can see how it would feel like to be a pedestrian walking down new parts of the downtown and what it might look and feel like.
And you have several alternatives with regards to the approach to the tunnel.
Yes, that's right.
As well.
And so we found, as David mentioned, the genesis, this really was looking at the tunnel itself and what we can do with that. So we think there'll probably be 3 options on the tunnel as well, intentionally tied to the pros and cons about each. Understanding what would happen if the tunnel went away, for example. What would you do with that piece of real estate? What if it had to be kept but not accessed? So what would you do in that case where you have to keep it but maybe people don't be able to go through it? And what happens if it remains? How that facility might change over time and what does it connect to? So I think you'll see in these alternatives the impact of that one decision starts to frame what you would do with the mall, what would you do with the plazas and development that surrounds it today as well as in the future.
And also with the Greenway project as well.
That's right. So how that connects to the broader context, you know, the start and stopping points of when you come out of the tunnel or other locations, those tie-ins become important as well.
Yeah, maintaining the connectivity that we already have and looking to improve it wherever possible.
That's right.
And a lot of the comments we've heard, the river has been so key to the development of the city, and where a lot of the responses have come in have talked about trying to get reconnected to the river, whether it be a crossing point, a pedestrian bridge across the river, or opportunities to interact with the river that folks don't have at the current time.
Right. As an original mill town, the river was the front yard. Over time, it's sort of become the backyard. You drive over it, you don't really see it too often. It's hard to access the river in a lot of places, and that is definitely one of the key points that we've heard from the community. They want more opportunity to highlight that resource, that it's not only a natural resource, but it's part of our culture and it's part of our history as well.
And right now we have a number of uses for the river that have come up. A couple of folks have talked about maybe putting a series of small dams on the river for hydroelectric generation. We also have people that want to use it for fishing. We have people that want to use it for kayaking and canoeing and so forth. So there are competitive uses for the river.
Sure.
They have to be taken into account as well during the visioning process.
Right.
That's right.
It presents some opportunities, it presents some challenges, so we're definitely monitoring that process as well.
I think what you'll see in these alternatives too is intentionally exploring what I call like a level of change along these different components. So, you know, what happens if a modest amount of change happens along the riverfront? What happens if it's a more aggressive amount of change along the riverfront? And what opportunities do those open up, and what cost might those open up as well? So we're hoping to hear a lot of dialogue at the next public meeting around what are the pros and cons, and how are we achieving the vision, and while certain parts might be open, others closed, is that okay, or does it need to be more or less? So it should be a fun dialogue about, you know, what's resonating with the community.
It should be. I know the first meeting was a fun meeting, and it was very nice the way it was set up with the different stations and so forth. Are you going to do that again on the 4th?
Yeah, we actually spent a lot of time with the city and the committee talking about the best way to structure this one. I think we learned from the last one that having different stations set up was actually helpful to have more conversations happening during the evening. So we're thinking here that we'll set it up in two functions. One is about understanding a little bit about these different geographies, but I think more importantly, having that time with our different parts of our team from an urban design and really development perspective. So looking at these alternatives and understanding urban design buildings and their placement and the development, that should be a really important part of the conversation across any of the alternatives that we're looking at. Thinking about it from a transportation perspective, again, looking at 2 or 3 different options, how do they weigh out against each other in terms of that transportation network, both in terms of probably one session that's more about kind of vehicles and about the roadway network, and perhaps another one that's more about pedestrians and bicyclists and about navigating the downtown at that finer grain scale. And then maybe there's probably a last one around the riverfront and around connections and open space and those public spaces, which are really critical to the life of the downtown as well. So probably those 4 themes.
I know some folks are turned off by a lecture type approach where people come in and lecture to them about what's what.
That's right.
The tone here is completely conversational.
It's absolutely conversation.
And because it's not only important to speak, it's probably more important to listen to what the residents have to say.
That's absolutely right. So we're structuring the evening where we're going to have a very prompt start at 6:30 is the plan, because what we want to do is speak a little bit up front so that people are armed with as much information. That we're going to share everything that we've learned so far, probably within the first 20 minutes to 30 minutes, then let the rest of the evening be about these conversations with folks about those 4 topic areas. So a lot of time to talk during the evening.
Yeah, break into smaller groups so that they can really dig into the details a little bit more in a more intimate scale.
Right.
And I was very impressed with how you were able to document from the last session what people had to say. They wrote some things down, but a lot of it was verbal and it was captured, and it's been very definitely taken into account with the work you've done today. And I would imagine you're going to continue in that vein as we move forward.
Oh, absolutely. We're going to be recording notes at each of these stations that we talked about. And we're thinking that we're going to come up with some fun exercise at the end where we maybe think about the next steps in the planning process, which we're still trying to figure out ourselves, but making it very hands-on, very engaging. The more that we can hear, the more people can write down and engage, it just makes the process much better.
Again, we're not here to tell the community what should happen. We're asking them what should happen, and then we want them to participate and be engaged and be involved.
And again, what the vision comes out with is going to be reflective of those inputs that you receive from the community.
That's
so
right.
That's why it's so very important for people to come in. This is their downtown,
Right.
and what they participate and say and will be reflected in that study and eventually translated into changes in the downtown.
That's right. That's right.
It's going to be a big project.
And what I find is fun about this part of the process is, as you're going to see, there's a lot of different alternatives and sub-alternatives and ideas, just so that we can facilitate that conversation. What comes next is figuring out how do you get it done and how do you move it forward. So hopefully part of the conversation, folks will be thinking about what they like, what they don't like, but equally importantly, how do you move it forward? How do you make it into a project, and how do you be a catalyst for these steps that will likely follow over the next 10 to 15 years?
Well, the conversation also incorporate timelines, or is this a vision for 5 years out, 10 years out, 50 years out? Yeah,
I think it's closer to, a lot of time has passed since that tunnel was built back in 1970, 69 and 70. So it's taken us a long time to get where we are. It's going to take us a long time to sort of turn the ship, so to speak. So yes, it's going to take, I would imagine this is 15 to 30 year planning horizon, perhaps even more, given the fiscal realities of some of the larger projects that might need to occur to make this all happen.
But speaking of fiscal realities, there's also definitely an economic development component to this as well. And perhaps looking a little differently and how we're using the existing structures and where people might want to start doing some things to upgrade their buildings, especially now where we're talking about the 79E program that may be one of our tools to be able to implement some of these visions.
Right. The 79E tax relief incentive program is one tool. We've talked about economic revitalization zones, and the downtown, both downtowns, along with some other areas of the city, are part of that program as well. So we're going to try to put together as broad a spectrum of tools and opportunities to make this all happen. It's going to take some public efforts, it's going to take some private efforts, it's going to take some joint effort.
Right. It's just not a plan that's going to sit on a shelf. We're already taking steps in the city to try to make this vision, when it's complete, to become a reality by creating some of these tools that are allowed under the law that will assist folks in making some of these dreams come true.
That's right. And I think our experience, having done work like this in other communities, is that time frame that David mentioned, about that 15 to 20 plus year time frame. If you think about how cities and downtowns grow and evolve over decades and centuries, and the ideas of what happens in terms of markets and trends and housing and retail and the economic cycles and so forth, having a plan like this in place and realizing that things will be implemented and leveraging those cycles and reacting to those cycles is very important. And some of them might be specific projects, but some of them might be 10-year initiatives where over time you might see those initiatives turn into benefits to the downtown. So trying to balance specific things, long-term things, strategies, all that needs to be part of this plan so it doesn't sit on the shelf and just become a pretty picture.
Right, and there'll be different components that'll be able to be phased in at different times. You know, things like streetscapes, maybe we can do a little sooner.
That's right.
Those types of things.
One of the things we initially asked for in hiring, selecting a consultant and hiring VHB and its team is to help us strategize and prioritize what things need to happen before the next, to really build sort of the critical mass to get it moving on its own terms.
That's right.
So that'll be very important.
That's right. So let's look at these alternatives, figure out what people are gravitating towards, and then figure out that implementation plan on those key steps on how you get there.
Right.
That's the next chapter.
Did you bring any graphics this afternoon?
Yeah, so hopefully, I think through this video, we'll be able to share a couple of those to show people what we're going to be looking at. As I mentioned before, we have some pretty interesting loose character sketches that show people what things could look like over time. We're going to be sharing those. We have some before and after images of the downtown, which I think will be interesting for folks to see, and some plan views that'll show, transportation roads that morph into different types of systems and operations, some of which you have today, some of which are new treatments in the transportation environment, which might be pretty compelling. We're also focusing on not only providing flow and traffic management in the downtown, but also looking to think about what's called all modes of transportation. So it's not just about the car. It's about pedestrians and bicyclists, and about reclaiming some of that asphalt to make it better utilized, and maybe putting some of that back along the edges and streetscape and those things too. So
and pedestrian safety is definitely a part of that.
absolutely. So looking for things like crosswalks where they should be located, and about bump outs in the streetscape so that we can
Traffic
neck down
calming.
the traffic calming. So we'll be able to share a lot of those ideas. And I think what I'm excited about in the plan is that there's a lot of room for change and improvement that I think once we get the community input on, we'll be able to tweak those where it's not just about, again, vehicles and adding capacity. I think some of those options show how you can expand parts of Colburn Park, for example, or what do you do in front of the city hall to maybe expand the sidewalks and things out in that area. So talking about what you do with that reclaimed space that you don't have today.
Right. I think looking at some of the preliminary sketches and drawings that have been put together so far, it's pretty exciting to think about how much, there's so much pavement around Colburn Park, and it's not all needed for the traffic and the parking needs that we have. So there's opportunities to expand that public realm and the opportunities to change or expand farmers markets and concert events and public events is pretty exciting.
It is. It really is. Can you talk a little bit, David, about how this dovetails with the master plan?
Sure. The master plan has its own chapter about downtown Lebanon. There's a separate chapter about West Lebanon as well. But it talks at length about the city being more proactive in going out to sort of try to guide and achieve the kind of development that it wants, to be more mixed use, more dynamic, more vibrant. If you think about driving around Colburn Park after there's been a race, one of the road races that are held, or on a sunny Thursday afternoon in the summer when the farmers market is in full swing, it is very lively. It's a great place to visit. It's a great place to want to park your car and get out and walk around and see what's happening. What the master plan says is we'd like to have that energy, that vibrancy every day of the week and all year round. So basically this project, there's close to 50 or 60 different strategies and action items that are spelled out in the master plan just for the downtown chapter. And this particular project, we've structured it in terms of setting up what the goals are for VHB and its team. If we achieve this study and pull together a comprehensive plan, it's going to address almost every single action item and strategy in the chapter. So it'll be a major step toward implementing the master plan.
Right. One of the things that drew me to the city was the fact that your master plan is actually put in action.
Yes.
I've been associated with other communities where the plan was done as an exercise only, right. And it did sit on a shelf and it wasn't implemented, and it was very unfortunate. And then, over 5 years, the shelf life of the plan, nothing would get done. Right. And it was very disappointing. Here in Lebanon, we're moving forward as a team across all fronts, and it's very refreshing to see the approach that city government uses in working in conjunction with the citizens.
Yeah, it should be, it is the guiding document for the city.
I think you'll see in these alternatives, again, hopefully we'll address a lot of those different pieces that came out of that chapter of the master plan. But we often say, if you could start with one item, where would you start first in implementing this? And if there's real budgets and timeframes associated with these, so how do you think about those to take one step that can leverage the next and the next over time? There'll be a lot of these alternatives to look at So it quickly becomes, all right, if you can do all of these things, where do you start to make it successful so that it doesn't do what you just mentioned, where it sits around for 5 years?
Right.
So that'll be an important thing for people to be thinking about, like what is the most important thing to start with that can really be a catalyst for these other things to fall into place over
Of course,
time.
we have to take into account fiscal realities as well.
Absolutely.
Right.
That as we move forward with this project, how much we're going to fund it through the capital improvement program and what needs to be done there so that it's not painful to the citizens as we move forward as well.
Right. There's a fiscal reality check component to this whole project and study as well. That's going to, as Jeffrey said, everybody can pick out the alternatives that they like, but if it's not feasible, if it's not fiscally real, it's going to be hard to achieve those goals. But if we can look at every different grant program, every different public-private partnership, TIF districts, 79E, capital improvements, it's going to take the full spectrum of funding opportunities and options to make this happen.
Oh, well, but we're moving forward on all those fronts.
Correct. We're going to look into everything.
Firing on all cylinders.
That's right.
That's right. The other part I mentioned is it's going to be important for folks to realize that while there might be what appears to be options, this is really about exploring scenarios and playing out those themes over time. So there's much room in what people are going to see where we can pull pieces from one scenario versus another scenario to try to make it the preferred approach towards doing this. So hopefully a lot of the conversation will be around the best of what people like from these different pieces of the scenarios that we're going to be showing and a strategy on how you move those forward. So that'll be what we'll be thinking about in the background, about not one versus this, but how do you get the best of all the different pieces? Because I think there's a lot of merit to these different approaches that we're trying that we need to understand from the community, the appetite to do some of these things, the real financial challenges with moving some of these forward. So if you can do things in 3 different ways that all can pan out in a similar way, but one might cost less than the other, I think that's a healthy part of the conversation that we need to be figuring out. And this idea of mixing and matching, I think, is a good thing to be talking about at this stage in the process.
And where's the next public session and what time again?
So the next public meeting is Thursday, February 4th. It will be at the Lebanon High School cafeteria. That's 195 Hanover Street. The meeting is 6:30. We're gonna try to have a pretty prompt start, so we can spend as much time in the breakout groups talking in detail about some of these options and alternatives. So it's 6:30 to 9, Thursday, February 4th.
If we, by the odd chance, we have a big snowstorm, is there a snow date?
There is a snow date. It would be the following Wednesday, February 10th, same time, same location, 6:30 at the high school cafeteria.
And again, there's plenty of parking.
Plenty of
Easy
parking.
access,
Yes.
handicapped access. They do a great job of moving the snow. So it should be readily available for all citizens to be able to attend this meeting.
Right. Given the success of the first meeting, we really felt like the senior center might not be big enough, which is why we went to a little bit larger venue to make sure that we can accommodate everybody who wants to come out and participate.
It was a little tight in that setting, and I think it's a wise choice to move forward because I think given the responses we've had, both in the mail and online and all the buzz around
Right.
the city about
Yes.
this project, and now we actually see some of the alternatives coming forward as a result of the input to date, and it's an opportunity to really see more of what's going on.
Right.
There's a little more to look at, and as opposed to talking broadly, now we can look at some specifics
Yeah.
and what they may look like and so forth.
Right. Some of the sketches are they're pretty exciting. They're pretty exciting to contemplate for downtown.
Yeah, I've had a chance to see them.
Yes.
Great. Yeah, we're looking forward to seeing it. This is the best part of the conversation because you see where things gravitate towards and it helps you get towards that action plan in the future. So
Right.
it should be a lot of fun.
Right. Anything else, gentlemen?
No. Please come out. Please participate. This is your downtown. We need to hear the voices of the people who live here, who work here, who want to live here and work and play and shop. We can't do this project without you.
Absolutely not. And again, where is it?
It's at the
And what
Lebanon
time
High
is it?
School, Lebanon High School cafeteria, 6:30 to 9 p.m. Thursday, February 4th.
Great. Please join us that evening and share with us your opinions, your dreams for the downtown, and help us make those become a reality for you. Thank you.